A routine traffic stop, or a dangerous setup. When Officer Trevor Kingsley plants evidence on an innocent black woman, he thinks it's just another day on the job. But there's one thing he doesn't know: she's an undercover FBI agent. And now, the hunter is about to become the hunted. Stay tuned for a story of corruption, betrayal, and ultimate justice. The city lights of Los Angeles flickered against the dark sky as Officer Trevor Kingsley cruised down the nearly empty streets. His shift was almost over, but he wasn't the type to clock out quietly. He had a reputation to uphold, the kind built on intimidation, planted evidence, and arrests that looked good on paper, no matter how questionable they were in reality. Tonight, his eyes locked onto a sleek black sedan driving steadily down West Adams Boulevard. A woman was behind the wheel, young, black, well-dressed. Someone who, in Trevor's mind, fit the profile of trouble in the way he liked to define it. He didn't need a real reason to pull her over. He just needed to make sure she had no way out. Flipping on his siren, he accelerated behind her. The car hesitated for a moment before smoothly pulling over to the curb. Trevor took a deep breath, adjusting his belt and the gun on his hip before stepping out. The cold air hit his face as he approached the driver's side window. The woman inside rolled it down just enough to meet his gaze. Her expression was calm, composed, too composed. Trevor didn't like that. "License and registration," he said, keeping his voice firm but detached. "Of course, officer," she replied, reaching into her glove compartment without hesitation. She moved carefully, deliberately, as if she had practiced this before. Her name on the license read Marissa Hudson. Trevor glanced at it briefly before shoving it into his pocket. He wasn't done yet. "You were speeding," he continued, watching for her reaction. Her brows knit together slightly. "I don't think that's correct, officer. I was going the limit." Trevor smirked. "Are you saying I'm lying?" Marissa exhaled through her nose. "No, sir. I'm saying I wasn't speeding." Trevor tapped his flashlight against the edge of her car door. He had encountered women like her before, too confident, too smart, too unwilling to play the role he expected. That only made it easier to push them into a corner. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. She hesitated. "On what grounds?" Trevor didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the door handle and yanked it open. Marissa flinched, but she didn't resist as he grabbed her by the arm and pulled her out. "Turn around, hands on the hood," he instructed. Marissa obeyed, her face unreadable as he patted her down. Of course, she had nothing on her. But Trevor had come prepared for that. A quick glance inside her car gave him exactly what he needed: a small leather pouch on the passenger seat. In a smooth motion, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny bag of white powder. He pressed it into his palm, then let it fall into the pouch as he picked it up. Well, he murmured, holding the pouch up to the streetlight. "What do we have here?" Marissa turned her head slightly, eyes narrowing. "That's not mine." Trevor clicked his tongue. "You must have dropped it, sweetheart. You want to tell me what's really going on here?" She didn't respond. But for the first time, Trevor saw something flicker across her face, not fear, but calculation. She was thinking, measuring her next move. That was the first sign that something was off. Still, he played his role. "You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute," he announced, pulling out his cuffs. Marissa didn't protest, didn't even argue as he tightened the metal around her wrists. It was almost too easy. Too easy. A whisper of doubt crept into the back of his mind, but he ignored it. He had just made the worst mistake of his career. The fluorescent lights in the precinct buzzed faintly as Officer Trevor Kingsley walked through the double doors, his grip firm on Marissa Hudson's arm. She didn't struggle. She didn't shout or plead like so many others had before her. She simply walked, her chin slightly lifted, her eyes scanning everything around her. That look irritated him. It wasn't the look of a woman who knew her life was over. It wasn't the panic of someone who had just been caught with drugs. It was something else, something cold, calculating. Trevor clenched his jaw, pushing the feeling aside. At the booking desk, Sergeant Vance lifted an eyebrow. "What do we got here?" "Drug possession with intent to distribute," Trevor said, keeping his voice firm. "Bag of coke right in her car." Marissa, still silent, slowly turned her head toward him. For the first time since the arrest, she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind that made Trevor's stomach twist. "Cocaine?" she asked, her voice smooth. "Interesting." Sergeant Vance frowned. "She Mirandized?" Trevor gave a sharp nod. "She knows her rights." Vance sighed, rubbing his temple before nodding to the booking officer. "Print her, process her." As the officer stepped forward, Marissa finally spoke again. "I'd like my phone call." Trevor let out a low chuckle. "Yeah. Who you gonna call, sweetheart? Your dealer?" Marissa tilted her head slightly. "No. My attorney." There was something too certain about the way she said it. Too final. But Trevor shrugged it off. He'd done this too many times before to be rattled by a suspect playing tough. She was led away toward the holding area, her movements controlled, her face unreadable. He watched her go, arms crossed over his chest, before turning back toward his desk. This was just another routine arrest. At least, that's what he thought. Inside the holding cell, Marissa sat on the bench, her hands now free, resting on her lap. The officer on duty had given her a phone. She dialed a number, listening to the ring. 1, 2, 3. Then a voice answered. Deep. Controlled. "Agent Hudson." She allowed herself a small smirk. "We have a problem." There was a pause. Then, the voice on the other end became sharper. "Kingsley." "Among others," she confirmed. Another pause. Then, in a lower voice, "Do nothing. Stay quiet. We're moving." The line went dead. Marissa exhaled slowly, then handed the phone back. She folded her hands in her lap, her expression unreadable once more. Trevor Kingsley had no idea who he had just put behind bars. But he was about to find out. Back in the main precinct, Trevor sat at his desk, typing up his report when Sergeant Vance's voice cut through the room. "Kingsley. Get in here." Trevor frowned but stood, heading toward the sergeant's office. Vance was standing by his desk, arms crossed, a deep crease in his forehead. "We got a problem." Trevor leaned against the doorframe, forcing a smirk. "What?" The princess in the holding cell crying for her lawyer. Vance didn't laugh. Instead, he slowly sat down, rubbing his jaw. "You might want to sit for this one." Something in his tone made Trevor straighten. He stepped inside but didn't sit. Vance exhaled sharply. "I just got off the phone with someone way above my pay grade." "The woman you arrested?" He leaned forward, locking eyes with Trevor. "She's not who you think she is." A cold sensation prickled at the back of Trevor's neck. "What the hell are you talking about?" he asked. Vance reached into his drawer, pulled out a thin manila file, and tossed it onto the desk. "Her name isn't just Marissa Hudson," he said. "She's Special Agent Marissa Hudson. FBI." Trevor felt the floor beneath him shift. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "She's been undercover for over a year, investigating corruption," Vance continued. "And guess whose name has been floating around in that investigation?" Trevor's mind raced. This had to be a mistake. It had to be. "Bullshit," he muttered. "She had drugs in her car." Vance's jaw tightened. Did she? His voice was low, measured. Trevor felt his pulse pounding in his ears. He had been so sure, so damn sure, that this was just another easy arrest. But now, as he stood there, staring at that thin file on the desk, one sickening truth began to sink in. He had framed an FBI agent. And there was no way out of this one. The walls of the precinct felt like they were closing in on Trevor Kingsley as he stood in Sergeant Vance's office, staring down at the manila file. The letters practically burned into his retinas. Special Agent Marissa Hudson. FBI. His chest tightened. His mouth felt dry. This wasn't just a bad mistake. This was career-ending. No, it was worse than that. This was life-ending. You need to tell me right now, Kingsley, Vance said, his voice low and deliberate, is there any chance, that this arrest was dirty? Trevor's instinct was to deny, to lie, to say of course not, but his brain was moving too fast to form the words. Did she know? Had she known before the arrest? Was this a setup? His mind scrambled for an explanation, for a way out, but every path led straight to a dead end. I found the drugs in her car, he finally said, forcing his voice steady. Vance didn't blink. And I'm asking you, Kingsley. Did you really find them? Trevor's pulse hammered against his skull. He didn't answer. That was enough for Vance. The older man exhaled, rubbing his hands over his face. Jesus Christ. He reached for his phone, dialing quickly. Trevor's stomach dropped. Who the hell are you calling? Vance shot him a hard look. Command. They're sending in a federal liaison. This is way above us now. Trevor clenched his fists. His body ran hot and cold at the same time. If the feds got involved, he wouldn't just lose his badge, he'd be wearing prison orange. His mind raced. There had to be a way to flip this. A way to get ahead of it. But before he could think of an answer, the door to the office swung open. A man in a dark suit strode inside like he already owned the place. His presence was commanding, the air around him heavy with authority. His sharp, scrutinizing eyes locked onto Trevor like a predator sizing up its prey. Which one of you is Kingsley? The voice was steady, but it carried a lethal edge. Trevor squared his shoulders, masking the panic clawing at his insides. Who's asking? The man took another step forward, placing a badge on Vance's desk. FBI. Special Agent Dexter Hayward. Trevor's stomach twisted even tighter. Dexter didn't waste time. You arrested Marissa Hudson tonight. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Trevor forced himself to nod. That's right. Dexter tilted his head slightly. And you claim she was in possession of narcotics? Trevor's jaw locked. I don't claim anything. The evidence speaks for itself. Dexter was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady, unreadable. Then he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make Trevor feel the weight of his next words. You just made the biggest mistake of your career, officer. Trevor's fists clenched. Is that a threat? Dexter didn't blink. It's a fact. A slow, creeping realization settled into Trevor's bones. This wasn't just about Marissa. This was about him. And it wasn't just the FBI that was after him now. It was the entire system. Back in the holding cell, Marissa sat with her legs crossed, her expression composed as the heavy door creaked open. She didn't look up right away, taking her time before meeting the eyes of the man standing before her. Dexter Hayward. Her backup. Her lifeline. Nice of you to finally show up, she murmured. Dexter sighed, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Kingsley. Marissa nodded. It was him. He planted the drugs. Sloppy job, too. Dexter's lips pressed into a thin line. We suspected him. We just didn't have the right evidence. Marissa smirked. Well, now we do. Dexter crossed his arms. You sure you can handle this? If we push this case forward, you're going to war. Marissa's gaze turned cold, sharp. I've been at war, Dex, she said quietly. Now, it's time to win. Trevor Kingsley sat at his desk, staring at the blank computer screen in front of him. His hands were clenched into fists on the table, his mind spiraling. The precinct around him buzzed with the usual late-night chatter, phones ringing, officers exchanging reports, the occasional laughter from a far-off corner. But for Trevor, the noise felt distant, like he was underwater. FBI. The weight of that reality was pressing down on his chest. He had framed a federal agent. The implications of that were sinking in, one by one, like stones dragging him down. He needed to act. Now. He pushed back from his desk and stood abruptly, heading toward the back hallway where the evidence locker was located. If he could just. Going somewhere, Kingsley. The voice stopped him cold. He turned slowly, his pulse hammering. Special Agent Dexter Hayward stood just a few feet away, arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Sergeant Vance lingered near the doorway to his office, watching but saying nothing. Trevor forced a smirk, masking the unease twisting in his gut. Didn't realize I needed permission to walk in my own precinct. Dexter didn't move, didn't blink. Depends on where you're walking to. Trevor shrugged. Just grabbing a coffee. Dexter tilted his head slightly, as if studying him under a microscope. Funny. Looked like you were heading toward evidence. Trevor's jaw tightened. And if I was? Dexter took a slow step forward, his presence suffocating in its quiet intensity. Then I'd have to remind you that tampering with evidence in a federal case is a felony. Trevor forced himself to keep his posture relaxed, even as a bead of sweat prickled at his temple. You got nothing on me, federal. Dexter smiled faintly. Not yet. The air between them thickened, the tension so tight it could snap. Then, Dexter leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice so that only Trevor could hear. But I will. Trevor felt something cold slither down his spine. He had to get ahead of this. If he didn't, he was going to go down, hard. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked away, fists clenched so tight his nails bit into his palms. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Meanwhile, in the holding cell, Marissa Hudson sat with her back straight, hands resting lightly on her knees. The door creaked open, and she didn't need to look up to know who had entered. Dexter Hayward stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. Nice to see you still in one piece, he said dryly. Marissa finally glanced up, smirking. You were worried? Dexter scoffed. Not even a little. He moved closer, lowering his voice. I spoke to Kingsley. Marissa's smirk faded slightly. And? Dexter's jaw tightened. He's rattled, but he's not backing down. He knows he's cornered, and that makes him dangerous. Marissa nodded. She had expected this. Kingsley wasn't the type to go quietly. Dexter sat on the bench across from her, elbows resting on his knees. We have a window of opportunity here. If we move fast, we can turn this whole thing on its head. Marissa leaned forward slightly. Tell me what you have. Dexter exhaled, glancing toward the door before lowering his voice even more. Kingsley isn't working alone. We always suspected he was part of a bigger ring, corrupt cops planting evidence, taking payoffs, running interference for certain people. But we never had proof. Until now. Marissa's brows lifted. You think he'll lead us to the others? Dexter nodded. If we push him hard enough. He's already unraveling. Marissa leaned back, considering. Then let's push. Dexter smirked. That's what I was hoping you'd say. He stood up, knocking on the door for the guard to let him out. Before stepping through, he glanced back at her. Get some rest. You're walking out of here tomorrow. Marissa arched an eyebrow. And then? Dexter's smirk deepened. Then we burn it all down. The door shut behind him, leaving Marissa alone once more. She exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders. Trevor Kingsley thought he had buried her. He had no idea he had just dug his own grave. The sun had barely risen when the heavy steel doors of the holding cell groaned open. The guard barely spared Marissa a glance as he muttered, "You're free to go." Marissa stood up slowly, rolling the tension out of her shoulders. She had known this moment was coming, but she also knew it wasn't over. Not even close. As she stepped into the main hallway of the precinct, she spotted Dexter Hayward leaning casually against the wall near the exit, coffee in hand, his expression unreadable. "You always make such dramatic exits," he asked, pushing off the wall as she approached. Marissa smirked. Only when the entrance was a disaster. Dexter handed her a fresh cup of coffee, which she accepted with a nod of thanks. They walked side by side toward the front doors, their pace slow, deliberate. The eyes of several officers followed them, some curious, some uneasy. They all knew something was off. Outside, the air was crisp, the city waking up around them. Marissa took a deep breath before turning to Dexter. "What's next?" Dexter's face darkened slightly. Kingsley knows he's cornered. That means he's either going to fight or fold. Marissa nodded. "We need him to fold." Dexter smirked. "That's the plan." They walked toward an unmarked black SUV parked near the curb. Marissa slid into the passenger seat while Dexter got behind the wheel. The doors shut with a heavy thud, sealing them off from the world outside. "We've been digging," Dexter said, starting the engine. "And we found something." Marissa glanced at him. "What kind of something?" Dexter pulled out his phone, swiping to a photo before turning it toward her. It was a grainy surveillance image, 3 men standing outside a dark alley, exchanging something under the dim glow of a street lamp. Marissa recognized one of them instantly. Trevor Kingsley. The other 2 men, however, were new to her. Dexter tapped the screen. "These guys? That's Sergeant Leo Barrett and Officer Carl Mendez. Kingsley's not just dirty, he's part of a unit that's been operating for years." Marissa narrowed her eyes. "And what exactly have they been operating?" Dexter's lips pressed into a tight line. "Drugs, money laundering, even arms trafficking. But the worst part?" He swiped to another image, this one showing a woman, young, barely in her 20s, bruises along her face, eyes hollow. Marissa's stomach twisted. "They've been running human trafficking," Dexter said, his voice low, controlled. "And we think Kingsley's been handling their cleanups. Any witness, any victim that got too close to talking." He made a sharp slicing motion across his throat. Marissa clenched her jaw. "And no one stopped them?" Dexter let out a humorless laugh. "You know how this works, Hudson. They kept it quiet. Buried it deep. Any officer who started asking too many questions. Transferred, discredited, or worse." Marissa's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "So Kingsley isn't just a dirty cop. He's a fixer for something much bigger." Dexter nodded. "And if we don't take him down now, he's going to disappear." Marissa exhaled slowly. "Then we make sure he doesn't have anywhere to run." Dexter smirked. "That's what I like to hear." Back at the precinct, Trevor Kingsley sat in the locker room, his hands pressed against the cool metal of his open locker. His mind was racing, his pulse erratic. He had seen the way they looked at him. Vance. The other officers. Even some of the rookies who usually avoided eye contact. The news was spreading. They knew. And if they knew, that meant Barrett and Mendez knew too. Trevor pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed a number. It rang. Once. Twice. Then a voice answered, low and cold. Talk. Trevor swallowed hard. We got a problem. A pause. Then, no. You got a problem. Trevor's stomach twisted. Look, You screwed up, Kingsley, the voice cut him off. You went after the wrong person. Trevor's grip tightened on the phone. I can fix this. A chuckle. Hollow. Amused. No. You can't. The line went dead. Trevor slowly lowered the phone, his breath coming short and sharp. They weren't going to protect him. They were going to erase him. That night, Marissa and Dexter sat inside a dimly lit surveillance van parked a block away from the precinct. A monitor glowed between them, showing a live feed from the security cameras inside the station. Trevor Kingsley appeared on screen, his movements frantic. He was shoving things into a duffel bag, papers, cash, his service weapon. Marissa sipped her coffee. Looks like someone's ready to run. Dexter smirked. Told you he'd fold. Marissa's eyes stayed on the screen. Not yet. Trevor zipped up the bag and rushed out of the locker room, heading toward the back exit. The camera followed him as he pushed open the heavy steel door and stepped into the alleyway. That's when two figures emerged from the shadows. Barrett and Mendez. Trevor froze. His body went stiff, his eyes darting between them. Marissa and Dexter listened as the van's audio feed crackled to life, picking up the conversation. You weren't supposed to screw this up, Barrett's voice was calm, almost disappointed. Trevor took a step back. I can fix this, he repeated, desperation creeping into his tone. Mendez shook his head. No, Kingsley. You can't. The gunshot was sudden. Trevor's body jerked backward, slamming against the brick wall before sliding down, his hands clutching his stomach as blood seeped through his uniform. Marissa's lips parted slightly. Well. Didn't see that coming. Dexter sighed, rubbing his temple. That's what happens when you're a liability. Barrett and Mendez didn't even spare Kingsley another glance as they turned and disappeared into the night. The camera feed showed Kingsley's body twitching once. Then, stillness. Dexter reached for his radio. We got what we need. Time to move. Marissa cracked her knuckles. Let's end this. The streets of Los Angeles pulsed with late-night energy as the unmarked FBI van sped through back alleys and side streets, weaving through traffic with precise determination. Inside, Marissa Hudson and Dexter Hayward sat in silence, their focus razor-sharp. The live feed of Trevor Kingsley's execution was still fresh on the monitor, frozen on the last frame where his blood pooled beneath him. Dexter's fingers drummed against the dashboard. They took him out faster than I expected. Marissa exhaled, still staring at the screen. He was a loose end. They weren't going to let him talk. Dexter's grip tightened on the wheel. Now we don't have Kingsley to flip, which means we have to go straight for Barrett and Mendez. Marissa nodded, already thinking 3 steps ahead. We have their faces, their voices. We put this footage in the right hands, and they're done. Dexter chuckled, shaking his head. You really think it's that easy? Marissa turned to face him, her expression unreadable. No. I think it's going to get a hell of a lot worse before it gets better. Sergeant Leo Barrett leaned back in his chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass as he stared at the city skyline through his office window. The precinct was quieter at this hour, only the occasional shuffle of night shift officers breaking the silence. Across from him, Carl Mendez sat with his arms crossed, eyes flickering toward the door every few seconds. You're fidgeting, Barrett murmured. Mendez grunted. You really think this is over? Barrett took a slow sip of whiskey, savoring it before responding. Kingsley was sloppy. He got himself in too deep, and he paid the price. That's how this works. Mendez shook his head. He wasn't the only problem. The feds are watching. That agent, Hudson. She's still breathing. Barrett's jaw tensed slightly at the name, but his voice remained even. Then we take care of her next. Mendez let out a breath, rubbing the back of his neck. They already have enough to put us away. You saw the look on Vance's face earlier. He knows something's up. Barrett smirked. Then we make sure Vance keeps his mouth shut, too. Mendez hesitated before nodding. And if he doesn't? Barrett finally turned from the window, setting his drink down with a soft clink against the desk. Then we bury him. Marissa and Dexter had barely pulled into the underground garage of their FBI field office when their phones buzzed simultaneously. Dexter checked his first, his expression darkening. Shit. Marissa read the text on her screen. It was a single sentence, sent from one of their inside sources at the precinct. Vance is next. They're moving now. Marissa looked up at Dexter. We have to get to him. Dexter was already reversing out of the garage, tires screeching against the pavement. Buckle up. Sergeant Vance had been in law enforcement for over 20 years. He had seen corruption, had turned a blind eye to it more times than he cared to admit. But there was a difference between letting a cop take an extra cut off a drug bust and being complicit in murder. And that's what this was. He had just finished reviewing the precinct's security footage. Kingsley's body in the alley, Barrett and Mendez standing over him like executioners. Vance felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had let things slide for too long. Not anymore. Grabbing his keys, he moved toward the door, his gut twisting with a deep sense of urgency. He needed to get out of there. Get to the feds. Get somewhere safe. But the moment he stepped into the dimly lit parking lot behind the station, he knew he was too late. A black SUV idled near the exit. The front passenger door swung open. Leo Barrett stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his uniform, his expression calm. Too calm. Long night, Vance. Vance's hand hovered near his holster. I don't have time for this, Barrett. Barrett took a slow step forward, his voice lowering. You don't have to do this. Vance scoffed. Do what? Pretend I didn't just see you and Mendez execute Kingsley. Barrett tilted his head slightly. You sure you saw that? Or did you see what I tell you to see? Vance took another step back. I'm done playing games. Barrett sighed, as if disappointed. That's a shame. Mendez moved first. He came from the shadows, fast and quiet. The glint of a knife flashed under the dull streetlight. Vance barely had time to react before Mendez lunged. A gunshot rang out. Not from Vance's weapon. Not from Barrett's. From the parking lot entrance. Mendez's body jerked violently before crumpling to the ground. Blood spread quickly beneath him. Barrett's head snapped toward the source of the shot, eyes widening. Marissa Hudson stood at the entrance, gun raised, her stance unwavering. Behind her, Dexter Hayward aimed his own weapon at Barrett. Game over, Dexter said coolly. For the first time, Barrett looked uncertain. He glanced between the two agents, then at Mendez's unmoving form. Vance, seizing the moment, drew his own gun and trained it on Barrett. Hands where I can see them. Barrett's jaw clenched, his fingers twitching slightly. But he wasn't dumb. Slowly, he raised his hands. Dexter stepped forward, slapping cuffs onto Barrett's wrists. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it. Barrett didn't speak. He just stared at Marissa, his expression unreadable. As Dexter led him toward the waiting FBI vehicles, Marissa exhaled, lowering her gun. Vance looked at her, still catching his breath. Took you long enough. Marissa smirked. You're welcome. As the FBI transported Barrett away, Marissa and Dexter stood off to the side, watching as the police station slowly came back to life. Officers murmured, exchanged glances, the weight of the moment settling in. Dexter crossed his arms. You know this isn't over, right? Marissa nodded. There's more of them. Dexter sighed. Always is. Marissa glanced at him. Then let's get to work. Dexter chuckled. You never stop, do you? Marissa smirked. Not when there's still trash to take out. As sirens wailed in the distance, the two agents turned toward the city, knowing this was just the beginning. The interrogation room was dimly lit, the overhead fluorescent bulb casting sharp shadows across the walls. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and sweat, an atmosphere designed to make even the most hardened criminals uneasy. Leo Barrett sat at the metal table, wrists cuffed, his face a perfect mask of indifference. He had been in this position before, just never on this side of the table. His uniform had been stripped from him, replaced by an orange jumpsuit, though he still sat with the posture of a man who thought he had control. Across from him, Marissa Hudson placed a thick case file onto the table with deliberate slowness. She didn't speak at first. She let the silence stretch between them, watching the way his jaw tightened ever so slightly. Dexter Hayward leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Finally, Marissa pulled out a single photograph from the file and slid it across the table. It was a still image from the surveillance footage, Barrett and Mendez standing over Kingsley's dying body. Barrett didn't even glance at it. Is this supposed to scare me? Marissa smirked. No, Barrett. That's just the opening act. She pulled out another document, flipping it open to a series of financial records. Offshore accounts. Payoffs. You and Mendez funneled millions through shell companies. We have the transactions. We have the paper trail. Barrett finally looked down at the files, but his expression didn't change. Dexter pushed off the wall and walked toward the table, leaning down slightly. Human trafficking. Drug distribution. Murder for hire. You ran it all through your network of dirty cops, and Kingsley was your personal cleaner. Problem is, you didn't clean up after yourself. Barrett scoffed. If you had anything real, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be in federal court. Marissa's smile didn't waver. You will be. But first, I want to make you an offer. Barrett leaned back, feigning boredom. Let me guess, you want me to flip? Dexter let out a dry chuckle. Oh no, Barrett. We don't need you to flip. We already have everything we need. Marissa tapped on the file. But here's the thing. You're not the top of the food chain, are you? Someone else is pulling the strings. For the first time, a flicker of something passed over Barrett's face. It was subtle, but Marissa caught it. Dexter's voice dropped slightly. You think your bosses are going to save you? Kingsley thought the same thing, and look how that turned out. Barrett exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping once against the table. You don't understand the game you're playing. Marissa leaned in slightly. Then explain it to me. Barrett chuckled darkly, shaking his head. You think arresting me and Mendez makes a difference? You think you can wipe the filth off this city with a couple of handcuffs? He looked her dead in the eye. For every one of me that goes down, 2 more take my place. Marissa didn't flinch. Maybe. But you're not getting out of this. Barrett's smirk wavered. He knew she was right. Dexter picked up the file and tucked it under his arm. Enjoy your last few hours of leverage, Barrett. Because once you're processed into federal custody, you're a loose end. And you know how your people handle loose ends. Barrett didn't respond. Marissa tapped the table once before standing. Tick-tock. She and Dexter turned and walked out, the heavy steel door slamming shut behind them. As they stepped into the brightly lit hallway, Dexter let out a breath. He's not going to flip. Marissa nodded. No. But he's scared. Dexter smirked. You saw that too? Marissa folded her arms. He's right about one thing. He's just a piece of this. Dexter sighed. Then we keep going. As they walked down the corridor, their phones buzzed at the same time. Marissa glanced at hers first. A new name. A bigger name. She looked at Dexter, her expression darkening. This just got a lot bigger. Dexter checked his phone and let out a low whistle. Damn. You ready for this? Marissa smirked. Always. The FBI field office was buzzing with controlled chaos. Agents moved swiftly through the halls, papers in hand, phones ringing in a constant hum of urgency. Something big was happening, and everyone could feel it. Marissa Hudson and Dexter Hayward sat in a glass-walled conference room, a large board filled with names, photographs, and red string connecting key players. In the center of it all was Leo Barrett, his name circled in bold red ink. But now, there was another name above his. Vincent Rourke. Marissa tapped her fingers on the table, staring at the evidence they had just received. Barrett was a lieutenant. Rourke is the commander. Dexter exhaled sharply, running a hand through his short hair. Damn. We always suspected someone higher up, but this? This is next level. Vincent Rourke was a respected figure, a deputy commissioner who had spent the last 2 decades building his reputation as a clean cop. Publicly, he was a hero. Privately, he was the architect of the corruption that had infected the force. Every dirty cop, every planted piece of evidence, every trafficked woman and stolen dollar, it all led back to him. Dexter gestured toward the board. Rourke's insulated. We can't just arrest him, we need an airtight case. Marissa's eyes darkened. Then let's build one. Hours later, they were sitting in front of a surveillance feed inside an unmarked van parked outside one of Rourke's properties, a sleek, high-rise apartment overlooking the city. Dexter checked his watch. You think he knows we're onto him? Marissa smirked. He's too powerful to be afraid. That's his mistake. Inside the building, Rourke moved with calculated ease. He poured himself a drink, his movements smooth, deliberate. He was a man who had gotten away with too much for too long. Marissa leaned into the mic. All right. Let's stir the pot. With a single press of a button, the text was sent. A burner phone inside Rourke's penthouse buzzed. He picked it up, frowning. The message was simple. They know everything. He straightened, eyes flicking toward the security cameras in his apartment. Paranoia. That's what they needed. Rourke immediately grabbed his personal phone and dialed a number. In the van, an agent patched them into the call. Barrett is in custody. Rourke's voice was sharp, controlled but laced with tension. If he talks, we're all dead. On the other end, a low voice responded. He won't talk. Rourke paced. You better be right. Because if the feds come knocking on my door, I'm taking everyone down with me. Marissa exchanged a glance with Dexter. There it was. The confirmation they needed. Dexter grinned. Gotcha, you son of a bitch. Less than an hour later, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up in front of Rourke's high-rise. The FBI moved fast, swarming the building, clearing each floor. Marissa and Dexter led the charge, moving with purpose. By the time they reached Rourke's penthouse, his security had been neutralized, and he was already on the phone. Lawyer. Now. Marissa shook her head, smirking. Not this time, Rourke. Dexter tossed a folder onto the table. Wire transfers. Recorded calls. Testimonies from victims you thought were too scared to talk. He leaned in. It's over. For the first time, Rourke's mask cracked. His jaw tightened, and his eyes flickered with something close to rage. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. Marissa raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I understand perfectly." She pulled out one last document, a federal arrest warrant with his name printed in bold letters. Rourke's breathing steadied. He sat back in his chair, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. Then, he smirked. "You think taking me down will change anything?" Marissa's smile was slow and sharp. "No. But it's a damn good start." 3 days later, the headlines were everywhere. Deputy Commissioner Vincent Rourke arrested in corruption scandal. FBI uncovers massive criminal network within LAPD. Justice served, corrupt officers face federal charges. The ripple effect was immediate. More officers were arrested. Some turned informants, giving up details on even more corruption. Others simply disappeared, their powerful allies realizing they were liabilities now. Inside the FBI office, Marissa stood in front of the board where it had all begun. Red string still connected names, but so many of them had been crossed out. Dexter walked up beside her, coffee in hand. "You did it." Marissa smirked. "We did it." Dexter clinked his coffee cup against hers. "What now?" Marissa took a deep breath, looking at the board one last time before turning away. "Now." She grinned. "We find the next one." And just like that, they walked out, ready for the next battle. This story is more than just a tale of corruption and justice, it's a reflection of a broken system, of power abused, and of the people who risk everything to expose the truth. Marissa Hudson wasn't just fighting a few bad cops, she was fighting an entire culture of corruption that had thrived in the shadows for years. Trevor Kingsley, Leo Barrett, and even Vincent Rourke weren't anomalies, they were products of a system designed to protect itself at all costs. But every system has its flaws, and sometimes, all it takes is the right person, someone unwilling to back down, to bring the whole thing crashing down. What makes this story powerful is that it doesn't end with a neat bow. Corruption doesn't vanish overnight. For every Rourke that falls, there's another waiting to take his place. But change starts somewhere, and Marissa proved that one person, with the right team and enough determination, can make a difference. It's a story of resilience, justice, and the high price of doing what's right. And maybe, just maybe, it's a reminder that the truth always finds a way to rise, no matter how deep people try to bury it.